Hello, everybody, and welcome to Adobe Live. I'm Flynn Tracy. I'm really excited to be here hosting this episode with Ian Haigh. How are you, Ian?
I'm very well, thank you, Flynn. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. And hello to everybody in chat. I'm aware it's a public holiday in the US, so you might be watching this on replay. You might be watching this live. If you are, head over to behance.net/live and let us know if you have any questions while we're going. We're here for an hour today. This is part 3 of a 4-part series. I had to practice that. Part 3 of a 4-part series, getting started in Premiere Pro. So we're kind of going to pretty much dive right in a moment. And if, there's a lot of, there's 4 hours of content already. And so if you're watching this on YouTube, there'll be links through to those other episodes to catch you up to speed. But Ian, we've been through a lot together.
Yeah, we really have. We really have 4 hours. What a journey!
It is.
Yeah. It's been really fun so far, and we've still got loads of great stuff to show you. Today, I've got a bit of an itinerary. If you are interested to go and check out that itinerary, you can just go to my website. It's ianhaigh.com. So you can sort of see the way that it's spelled down there, just under my name, Ian Haigh, HAIGH.com. And then if you go to the homepage is here, and then if you click on Adobe Live, just at the top there, you can see here links to episodes 1 and 2. It'll take you straight through to the YouTube. And number 3, which is today, we have a bit of a menu. So we're probably not going to be able to get through all of that. There's a lot there, but it'll give you an indication of the sort of things that we're going to cover.
Yeah, exactly. And the way that this series was designed was from very scratch. So if you're a designer that is interested in learning Premiere Pro, if you've used some other programs and you're interested in kind of transferring over, all that sort of stuff, we literally start from scratch, like having a poke around the interface, looking at panels, importing media, all sorts of stuff like that. So from the very, very beginning, and then we're kind of scaling up.
Yeah, and if you are someone who has done a bit of editing using iMovie, for example, then we're also touching on some of the more advanced features that Premiere offers. And you might be a casual Premiere user. Some of the things that I'm going to talk about today are things that you might have wondered about, or there might be some things in the program that you're not too familiar with or might have never encountered. And so we'll be covering off some of those as well.
Yeah, fantastic. All right. And if there are any questions as we're going through, just throw them in chat. Regular watchers of the stream, hey, Festus in the house. Yeah, it's holiday in the States. So yes, there's not a lot of other streams today. So it might be just us, and I think the UK team are streaming tonight as well, or tonight our time. But yeah, so if there are any questions as we go, we'll just ask as we're going along rather than taking a break today, because there's so much to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. Jump in with any questions, and I'll do my best to get to them all. So should we jump straight in?
Let's jump straight in.
Okay, so first of all, just up here under the grab bag, these are just during the week I've been editing away in Premiere, and there were a couple of things that I thought I should add just because I like them a lot. So I thought we'd cover those ones up, starting with search bins. Cool. So we're all familiar with the regular bin, which is it's a kind of Premiere's word for folder. So that's where you're going to store all of your assets. So whether that's images or movies, so other comps and sequences you can put in there as well. And that's all well and good. But if you have your media scattered across several folders, so you've organized them differently. So I could have all of these ones, say I could call that holiday, for example. So I've got some assets in that folder, in that bin. I've got some assets in this bin here. I've got some more assets down here. And they're spread out everywhere. If I wanted to see all of my movies in one place, but I didn't want to take them out of their folders, that's where search bins come in really handy. So there's a couple of ways of making a search bin. You can either do a search up here. So I could look for everything that had, for example, .mov. And that's going to show me everything that has a .mov extension. And then by clicking this icon next to the search field, it's going to create a new search bin from that query. So as you can see, it's just made a new that's dynamic one, search bin there, called it .mov for me, and it's put everything in there. So that's grouped every single item in the same place. Now it's also grabbed this one, Movember .jpg, because that's got MOV in the name. It's not strictly speaking a movie file. So I'm just going to delete that search bin and show you the other way to create a search bin. So I'm going to press the X button up there to clear my search. So we're seeing everything again. If I right click somewhere down here in the empty space and go new search bin, it'll bring up this create search bin window. So this is really powerful. You can get extremely granular in terms of the content that you're looking for. So yeah, you can just see here, captions, client, comment, description. You've got all these fields that you can fill in your meta tag, your metadata. In this instance, I'm just going to search for media type, and under here, I'll type movie. Now, it's going to show me every single movie without worrying about what the file name is. So that it's also included here. This one wouldn't have been included before because that doesn't have an MOV extension. It's got MP4 extension, so it's a movie, and this time it has been correctly included. Now, I happen to know that the media type for that was called movie, but if you didn't know and you were looking for a particular bit of metadata, up here at the top of the project window, you've got all of these different columns, all of the different kind of metadata. If I right click on one of those columns, I can say metadata display and then choose which items, and there's a crazy number of options in here. Like, it's insane. These are all flip open, and then there's like even more under there. And of course, for us mere mortals, you're probably not going to use most of those, but if you're working in the film industry or you're making a television commercial, then these are going to become more and more useful. So if I flip open this one here, these are just the basics, Premiere Pro project metadata. You can see media type is not displayed at the moment. If I click that on and hit OK, now media type is showing up here. So by opening these up, you can see what the names of these are. So still, image, video, movie, for example. So you can use those. You can use those when you're making your own search bins. So another way that I like to use search bins is if I have a whole bunch of sequences that I've created. So for demo purposes, I'm going to tuck these away somewhere, and I'll just call it demo. Now you can imagine as your projects get more and more complicated and you've got more and more assets and more sequences, it becomes difficult to find everything that you want. So I can make a search bin here, and under media type, I'm just going to type sequence. And now every single sequence in my project, if I double click that, they're all in this search bin. So I don't have to go digging through. I can see everything here. It's extremely convenient way to do those quick searches in your project without having to dig through endless bins. So search bins, incredibly handy. And I've made there's a few here. So you can do frame rates for different, if you're looking for, say, slow motion footage, labels for your assets as well. So these are all the ones that I've labeled with Mango. So yeah, extremely helpful. If you haven't used search bins, then I'd encourage you to give them a look.
That's awesome. Actually, there was a question about like movie or video file formats are pretty bizarre. Like there's so many of them, and we've sort of switched our standards quite a lot over the years. Anyone that's been on the internet for as long as us. Festus has a great question. Is there any movie file format that won't work with Premiere? Said knows for some reason MP4 or MOV doesn't work with Final Cut. Do you know, have you ran into anything like that?
Yeah, to some extent, you bump into obstacles when you are talking about different operating systems. And so, for example, QuickTime is an Apple product. So you can get QuickTime for Windows, but you have to install it. AVI is originated from Windows. So, you know, that sometimes you have difficulty importing those onto your Mac OS. I think that it's easier than it used to be, because you've got now a program like Premiere has done its best to support as many different formats as possible. So whether that's QuickTime, MP4 now has been natively supported for some time, and there's other containers like MXF, and it becomes, sometimes you do need to transcode from one file format to another in order to make it work. And that's something that I'm either today or in the next session I might just touch on, is transcoding from one file format to another, to not just to make it more compatible, but to make it faster to edit with. So I guess the short answer is there are probably a whole lot of obscure proprietary formats that you couldn't use, but there is probably going to be a way for you to get those formats into something that Premiere is happier with, and whether that's using some sort of encoding software. Sometimes you'll find that a manufacturer like Sony or Canon, the people who actually make the cameras to generate the footage, they will actually have their own proprietary software that you can use to convert into different formats. Otherwise, there are some Swiss Army knives out there as well that can do it for you.
Yeah, and Adobe Media Encoder as well is pretty good. And a lot of people I know use Handbrake as well to switch things around and compress things. So there's stuff out there. Yeah,
exactly. And there's one called for the real if you really feel like getting under the hood, there's a command line like FFmpeg is just mind-blowingly powerful. That's something I'm hoping to do some YouTube tutorials on one of these days. But if you're feeling particularly geeky, then check that one out as well.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. All right. So that was the search binge. Navigating with timecode is something that I use a lot, and I love it. So if I'm just going to open up one of these demo comps here. So timecode, as a quick little intro to timecode, if you're not aware of what that is. Timecode is a way to specify times and durations specifically in video terms. So when we're looking over here at this number at the top left of my timeline panel, or same number over here, that is clickable, and that's indicating right now the playhead position, and it's divided up into this number here at the moment is 0. That's the number of frames. Then we have the number of seconds, the number of minutes, and the number of hours. So if I move the playhead forward by 1 frame just by pressing the right arrow key, you can see now we're at 12 seconds and 1 frame. And so the number of frames, as I tap through, the number of frames per second will depend on the frame rate of your footage. So here we can see that we're getting up to 29 frames before we go to the next second. So this is basically 30 frames per second footage, or the timeline is anyway. So with that in mind, we can use that to move the playhead around, for example. So if we're at let's say we are at 2 seconds exactly, and now I want to move the playhead forward by 5 seconds. Now I'm just using the keyboard, I'm just going to type with no modifiers at all, +5. Right now, if I press enter, that's going to move the playhead forward 5 frames. So I'll just do that, and you can see it's going to jump forward just 5 frames. And if I type in +5 and then 1 dot, that's going to move the playhead forward 5 seconds.
Ah, cool.
So we were at 2:05 and now we're at 7:05. And similarly, if I wanted to move forward 5 minutes, I can just type +5 +5 ... And now that's moved us to 5 minutes, 7 seconds, and 7 frames into the future. So you can also now, you may have noticed that I was, before I was typing in, I would just click somewhere in the timeline to deselect the clip. That's because if you have something selected, then it will actually move that clip instead of just moving the playhead. So if I've selected that first clip and decided that I want that to start 2 seconds and 5 frames later, with that clip selected, I'm just going to type plus 2.5. So that means move this clip forward 2 seconds and 5 frames. When I press enter, you'll see the entire clip move forward. And now when I look at the start point of that clip by moving the playhead forward, it's at 2 seconds and 5 frames. And just on that note, right now, as I move the playhead, you can see it selects every single clip as the playhead moves over it.
Right.
And that's using a feature here called selection follows playhead. So under the sequence menu at the top there, selection follows playhead. If I turn that off, and now when I move my playhead around, it's no longer selecting all of those clips. So it's up to you whether you like that on or off. I often have it off because I want to be more deliberate about when I select clips. But if you're wondering why it keeps selecting the clip underneath the playhead, then that could be the reason. So anyway, that's a very handy way to move things around. If I want to move all of those 5 seconds in the future, I type +5 dot, they all go into the future 5 seconds. And you can also, if I can just type -5 dot, then there they are, moving backwards in time. So that's navigating with timecode, and it works pretty much everywhere that you would find timecode. So in here, you've got exactly the same principle. So if I decide that I like this as my first frame, I can type in I to make that my in point. And now I can type +2. If I know that I want 2 seconds, for example, I can type +2 dot and then type out. And then when I put that into the timeline, it's going to be, well, that'll actually be 2 seconds and 1 frame. If I want to make it exactly 2 seconds, I'll just move back 1 frame, type out. And then when I put it into my timeline, we can see here by zooming in on it and marking that clip that it is, oh no, I got it wrong. It was going to be 2 seconds. You get the idea. 2 seconds. So navigating with timecode, extremely handy, particularly if you know that you want something to be exactly a certain duration.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Now,
I know, like when I've created, well, I guess when I begin to create something, like even if it's just something for the family, like, you know, we went to the beach or something, we've got a little bit of shot on our phone, I might bring it into Rush or Premiere, and I just want to kind of quickly do like a 30-second like ad for the day and just have that instead of having all these kind of files everywhere. I'll often kind of grab things and try to make it, let's say it's 30 seconds, I might get 6 5-second clips and kind of start at that. Is that how you would start a really small little project like that? Like, do you try to keep it mathematically like, you know, fairly similar, or do you just start adding things and working away? Like, what's your workflow for something like casual like that?
Yeah, I think I guess it depends on the sort of what you're trying to achieve. Like sometimes I think going really free form can just be one way of you can just chuck it on the timeline and then just start if you're not too worried about the duration. But
right.
Then if you, like you say, if you needed something to be bang on, like for example, if you had a little piece of music that you really loved and the music was 30 seconds long, so
right.
you knew that you wanted everything to be 30 seconds long, then you might be a nice easy way to do it is just making everything precisely the right length. And if you're consistent, that can make things a lot easier. So if I was going to put in, like if you had 5 clips and you knew it was going to be 30 seconds, then yeah, each clip is 6 seconds long. That's a really straightforward way to do it. But yeah, I think I'm a stickler for getting things like just right, because I think that makes it easier to be consistent, and Premiere gives you the tools to do that, to do exactly that, so that you can just, whether you're using timecode or making everything line up perfectly, it's going to be much easier because you know how precisely what the durations are.
Yeah, cool. I like that, and that's where that feature comes in really handy.
Yeah, it's extremely useful. So I'll come back to here that we've got making multiple edits simultaneously. Now this one, I thought this was pretty nifty when I first uncovered it. So this is not dissimilar to what we were just talking about. So here I have a timeline. Each of these clips is precisely 15 frames long, and I know that because I'm just going to move it to the playhead, and then I'm going to type the X key. X just means mark this clip. So the playhead is over this clip. If I type the X key, it's going to set an in and an out point where the clip is. So just press X, and that's just marked to that clip. And I'm looking up here, it's showing me the duration of my in and out point. So if I clear the in and out point by typing Option X or Alt X on Windows, now it's telling me the duration of everything on my timeline. So that's 5 seconds and 10 frames. And if I press the X key, it's showing me 15 frames, which is the duration of just this clip. I can figure out the duration of several clips by selecting them, and I'm going to type Shift A, which marks the selection. So not just what's under the playhead, but literally what I've selected on the timeline. And you can see that that's 1 second and 20 frames. So just by going over here and typing X and then down and then X, I can see that all of these are exactly 15 frames each. Now, if I wanted to make them all slightly longer, I could just go in here and, for example, select the, I'm going to zoom in a little bit. If I click there and type plus 15, that's going to extend the duration of that clip. So now it is 1 second and 5 frames, but that would be slightly laborious to do that on every single one. And obviously the more clips you have, the more laborious that would be. So I'll hit undo here a couple of times. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down the command key, control on Windows, and I'm just going to drag over them all. Now, if I wasn't holding down that modifier, it would just select those clips. But when I do hold down the modifier, it selects the edit points.
Right.
And it's automatically put me into trim mode. Now I'm just going to get rid of these so it gets it up a little bit bigger so you can see what I'm talking about. So this is a special window. I don't think we've touched on this yet, but this lets you see the out point of the clip on the left and the in point of the clip on the right. And actually it's probably worth, what I'll do is I'll just talk about the edit window before I go into the multiple clips. So I'm just going to call up the trim window just for these two clips. So I'm going to move over the middle, the intersection between those 2 points here, and I'm just going to double click. And it's brought up this special trim window here. So you can see that this clip on the left corresponds to that clip on the left, and this clip on the right corresponds to this clip here. And I've got these buttons, so +1, +5, and the type of edit that I've got there is a roll edit. If I click the +5 button now, it's moved that roll edit 5 frames to the right, and it's updated the corresponding out point for this clip and the corresponding in point for this clip. I go back -5, and it's back to where we were. If I click on either of these up here, I change the type of edit that I'm making. So right now that's a roll edit where it's rolling the out point of this and the in point of that one. But if I click in this left window, the left side of this, you can see it's just changed it to a ripple out. So the difference being that if I press +5, now it's pushing everything along the timeline. I'll just do that one more time so you can see the difference. So here's a roll. I'm going to double click. If I press +5, it's moved that edit point, but it hasn't pushed everything along. If I click in the left window up here, it's changed it to a ripple out. And now when I press +5, it's lengthening the duration of this clip, but it's also moving everything along here to accommodate it. So this is a really nice way of working. I was pressing buttons here, but you can also just drag in the window to get a visual. You can see the number at the bottom here updating as I drag, so you can get just the right point and then let go, and it updates it in the timeline for you. Yeah, and then I can drag out this, for example, as well. And so you can, this is it's just a different way. Like Premiere gives you so many different ways to make these edits, and so this one, you can bring this window up really nice and big, and so you can get just the right frame and cut at exactly the right point visually, which is it's a really nice way of working. And that little button there, if you fancy a transition, just tap on that and it will apply the default transition. So we can put in a fade right from that trim window, just a little star wipe. Okay, so I'm going to just hit undo so we're back to normal. So that was just a sort of an overview of the trim window. And so now that we know what that does, I'm going to come back to where we were. All of these clips that we know are 15 frames, and we've decided arbitrarily that we want them to be another 15 frames each, so a total of 30 frames each. So I'm going to hold down the Command key or the Control key on Windows. I'm going to drag over just to select the edit points, and it's going to automatically bring up that window, the trim window that we were just talking about. I'm going to click once on the left side, and that's going to, if you keep your eye down here, these are all roll edits at the moment. Click once here, and now they're all ripple in edits. I can then use my timecode to type +15, and it's made all of those. I can show you before and after. That's before and that's after. So now they're all 15 frames longer, and I didn't have to go and do them all one at a time, which would have been extremely tiresome. So that's multiple edits simultaneously. You don't have to drag over everything either. I can hold down the Shift key, say, and just select them manually, +15. And I've just edited those 3 points at the same time. So you can get quite sophisticated. They don't all even have to be, at the moment I was just doing them all as ripple in points, but it gets quite tricky when you make it, some are in and some are out. So if I choose in point there, out point there, and then start dragging, I'm lengthening one clip and I'm making another clip shorter.
Oh, right. But you're making the other clip all the way over there shorter.
Yeah. So you can actually, as you can see, you can get quite sophisticated, particularly if you've got multiple tracks. And so you've got, you want to, and I've had to do this for clients sometimes where you think, okay, they want to put in one more clip here, but all of this is cut to the music and it's all, the duration is exactly how I want it. So I need to make room with multiple tracks without changing the overall duration. And so then it becomes this it's almost like, defusing a bomb where you're kind of making exactly the right points and then just moving them all exactly so that, and it's truly, when it all works, it's extremely satisfying. But yeah, it's incredible how much power there is in the Premiere interface for making those fine-tuned, those very, very clever interfaces. Amazing. So,
Steve was saying sometimes he wanted longer, slower transitions between the clips, but was hamstrung by clips that were too short, which can be frustrating.
Right. Yeah. That's something actually. Something that I wanted to touch on as well is.
It's good to see the puppies back.
We have. Yeah. The puppy is back.
It's the star of episode 2.
I love that little guy. Going to make him a sort of a trademark. So one thing that, particularly if you're just starting out with Premiere, it might not be obvious. Like, why is my transition not behaving as I expected? And it could be because you need to have enough space on both sides of the clip. So I'll just make one of these. We use the puppy and candles here. I'm just going to get rid of everything else. So if I drag out this clip so that it's quite a long clip. There we go. Now that's the very beginning of that clip, and I can see the tiny little triangle there indicating that's the very beginning of that clip. And similarly, we're going to drag out the end of this clip. Oh, they're both surprisingly long clips. Okay. There we go. And I'll just get rid of the edge of that and put these together using my snap so that I know that they're precisely aligned. Now that's here, there's no more clip after that. That's the very end of that clip. And there's no more clip before here. That's the very beginning of that clip. So if I try to put a transition in between those two, it's not going to, it doesn't have, like if I put a cross dissolve in, what you need is these clips to overlap, because what you're doing is effectively, you're seeing this, you're beginning to see this clip as this one's fading out, and you can still see this clip while this one's fading in, if you like. So they need to overlap. And if I try to put a transition in now, I'm going to, so here we go. I'm going to grab my cross dissolve transition and drag it over here. It says insufficient media. This transition will contain repeated frames. And that's because there's no overlap. So that's not what we want. It's sort of freezing. It's not looking very good. And also these stripes indicate that something's not quite right. So in order to make sure there is enough transition or enough media for it to make the transition, we can just use, going to double click there, and I'm going to trim the left side of this. So click once to turn it into a ripple out, and I'll type -5, 1, 2, 3. So now we've cut 15 frames off the end, and the triangle's disappeared. So I know that it's no longer at the very end. I'll double click again. I'm going to click once on the right frame to change it into a ripple in, and I'm going to move that, which is effectively trim forward many, which means it's going to trim off the edge of this clip, 1, 2, 3. And now when I apply my cross dissolve, there's plenty, it doesn't complain, there's plenty of space for it to blend from one into the next. So I hope that made sense. It's a little bit sort of frustrating at first when you haven't quite got the handle on it, but it just means that you need to have enough overlapping media in both of your clips for the transition to work.
So are you thinking about that sort of thing when you're shooting clips? Like, do you think you might want something for 5 seconds, or like, for example, this trip, you've got lots of different scenes and you're thinking maybe I'll put this together into a video clip. We'll save it on our phones and we can have a look at it, when we get home, that sort of thing, home movie night. Are you shooting a little bit longer than you want? You know what I mean? I'm just trying to think about like how are you thinking about how you might edit it and think, well, this is just going to be a quick little shot of this puppy, but you're actually shooting, for 10 seconds when it's probably going to end up being 5. Is that
that's such a good question. Yeah, it's exactly right. And it's it's something that you kind of definitely, as you do it more, you find that your videoing changes as you become sort of more familiar with what you need. And there's something lovely about being the shooter and the editor, because you do, when you're editing, you realize you get a better sense of what you're going to need. And so you're exactly right. You would leave it on something for a little bit longer than you would otherwise. Similarly, if you're making a video and you're filming somebody, maybe you're the one being filmed, when you say, okay, and that's it for us, thanks very much, see you later, you don't immediately then turn and leave.
Right.
You see the professionals, they'll say, and that's it, good night. Yeah.
Like the news reporters, right? And then it lingers accidentally because they've been burnt before, and the producer, they haven't switched off them, so they're just
that's right.
Waiting till they go.
It's super important. You need to make sure there's enough time for those fades, to do everything you need to. And yeah, but that's exactly when I'm shooting now, I'm thinking, how am I going to use this? And so do I have enough time to do everything? And it might be an effect or a transition, or it might be because I want to put titles on or something along those lines. So it's always a good idea to think about.
Cool. I like it a lot. I'll keep that in mind next time I'm shooting. Next time I get to leave the house.
Okay. So advanced editing. So we've just got through the grab bag with a couple of little bonus side hustles. So in this one, add edit all tracks. So I've put the little keyboard shortcuts. These are Mac ones, but every time you see that little symbol, that basically means control on Windows. And
I'll let you know in time, because it does go very quick when we're only here for an hour. So we've got about 20 minutes left.
Okay. Yep.
Goes quick, doesn't it?
It does go quick. I think that's a good sign.
Yeah.
So we have add edit all tracks. Right. So here's one where I've stacked the clips on top of each other. And this is using that little technique that we touched on last week, where we've just scaled them all. So all of these are separate clips on separate tracks, and I've just scaled them each one to 25% and stacked them on top of each other, and then used snapping to make sure that they're all exactly aligned to the edges of the stage. And now, as you can see, they're all different durations at the moment. And so when I have the timeline, when I have the playhead over them, I can cut through all of those simultaneously. And that's Command-Shift-K on the Mac, or Control-Shift-K on Windows. So when I type that, it's just going to put an edit point, slice right through all of those right there, and then I can just delete those ones. And similarly on the other side. So that becomes a really quick and easy way to just get them all to exactly the same duration. And there's a similar if I just type Command K without the Shift, or Control K without Shift on Windows, it's only going to put an edit point in number 1 and 4. And if you look over here, that's because these are the track targeting options. So right now I've got 1 and 4 highlighted, and 2 and 3 are off. And so for certain kinds of commands, that is only going to apply to the ones that you've got targeted. So that's extremely helpful. If you're wondering why sometimes a command is applying to some tracks and not others, it could be because you've got track targeting turned on. If I just turn those on and now I type Command K, then it's going to put that edit point into all of them. And of course, if I had none of those turned on and I just type Shift and tap on any of them to toggle them all at once and type Command K, nothing happens because they're not being targeted. Similarly, there's a little shortcut which I use all the time, and that's just the D for dog key. And if I just type a D with nothing else, it just automatically selects the tracks underneath the playhead. And as you can see, that's also using track targeting. If I had those turned on and pressed D, it'll select all of the tracks under the playhead. And as you can see, if I've cut them here, and now I could just type the D key, and it's only going to select these two because they're the only ones under the playhead that have got track targeting turned on.
Nice.
Does that make sense?
It does.
Good. While I'm in here, I see a good time to talk about the slip command, which is a really, really fun, super helpful tool when you're editing. So slip is a way of changing what part of a clip you're looking at without changing the duration, without changing the in and out points. So the best way to understand what that does is just use an example. So I'm going to trim these down so that they're only 5 seconds long. I'm going to make sure nothing is selected in my timeline, and I'm just going to type W, and that from last week's one is going to trim all of the out points under the playhead that have track targeting turned on to the playhead. So if I just type W, it's just trim them all to the playhead. So really, really quick and super fast way of getting through your footage. Now, if I'm looking through these, they're a bit randomly selected, but we're just going to work with it. I can use the slip tool by coming to my tools down here, choosing slip tool, which is just the Y key on the keyboard. So if you can't see your tool palette and you want to get the slip tool, you can just press Y. Now, when I move over any of these clips, it turns into the slip icon. And when I click and drag, you can see that it's changing the what I'm seeing, but the in and out point, the duration of the clip stay exactly the same. So if I press something like this, where I want it to all of these to be exactly the same duration all the time, I can't very well change the duration of one. This is where the slip tool really comes into its own. I can just click and drag. I so to say, oh, I like that train coming through there. When I click and drag, it's showing me the in and out points of that duration. So I can say I want, for example, the in point. Now the out point is the train just coming off the screen.
Yeah.
So when I play that one back, and we're looking at this one, I think, there. Similarly, I can just drag through here until we find something interesting. There's a bridge, and I'll say, okay, I want the out point to be just going underneath that bridge. When I play it back, we can see here. Another way of doing a similar thing, but without using the slip tool, is using the replace command. So if I open up this clip here, I'm going to highlight it, and I'm going to type the F key. And now that's brought up this clip, but it's the clip from the bin, not the clip on the timeline. The difference being, we went over this last week, if I double click it, you can see that this is actually on the timeline. And this one, by typing the F key, is actually just from the bin. So it looks exactly the same, but this is a fresh one from the bin. I can move the playhead around here, and if I find a clip that I particularly like, we could sort of say that one is a nice way to go out. So I'm not going to worry about the in and out points, but I'm worried about where the playhead is in this instance. So what this is going to do is it's going to make an edit where this playhead, where the playhead is here, is going to match up with where the playhead is here. So I can move the playhead to right near the end here, and you can see that this is the currently what we're looking at. With this clip highlighted, I'm going to drag it over here, and I'm going to choose replace. All right, one more thing. It should be fine because it's highlighted. So drag it over here, and I'm going to choose replace. And of course, nothing happens because
we're live. That's how it works.
Because we're live. Okay, I'm going to use the way that I usually do it, which is press the F11 key. And even that doesn't work.
It's the rules of being live.
Oh, that time it did. I don't know why. It might be that it just wasn't highlighted. So if I try that again, so I press F11, and what we want is that frame to be where that frame is, and there we go. It's exactly the right frame, and that's one that I use all the time. It's particularly, we haven't really touched much on music, but say there was a beat in the music which you can see, like, okay, here Poppy, she's flicked her hands out, like, and I think that would be great if it landed on a beat of the music, that point right there.
Yes. Yep.
So I can drop a marker in here if I want, don't need to. And then say there was, I will just get a track, a bit of music we can drop into the timeline.
We may or may not be able to hear it. I'm not sure. Let's give it a go.
Yeah.
Let me turn, my beats off.
Okay, so say, now I don't want to blow your head off. I'll just try this real quick.
Oh yeah, no, beautiful.
Okay, so say, for argument's sake, we are going to grab, seems like the music sort of kicks off a little bit. Yeah, there's a nice sort of, okay, I'm going to drop a marker in there. Now I'm going to use the replace. It also works with audio, so I want my beat to come in at this point. So with the playhead at that beat and the playhead here, I'm just going to press the F11 key. And so as you can see, it's even brought the marker along with me, so I know that's exactly where the beat's going to be.
Nice.
And I'm going to go back into my poppy clip, and that's where I've decided I want the music on that beat to come in. So I've moved the playhead here. I'm not worried about the in and out points because we're using the replace edit. The playhead is already lined up with that marker on that music. And I'm just going to press F11, and now that exact frame is where my beat's going to be. So when I play that back,
I did not know that you could do it that way. Perfect.
Yeah.
How good's that?
Yeah. Yeah. It's really cool. The replace edit is very, very powerful. And once you've wrapped your head around it, you find yourself using it all the time. I often don't use 3-point editing at all because I just find the replace edit so sort of intuitive and easy. It's a beautiful thing.
You mentioned it twice, but what was the shortcut? It was F11, was it?
Oh, F11, yeah.
Is that a special Ian Haigh shortcut, or is that built into Premiere Pro? Okay.
I'm trying to use the built-in ones as much as possible to make sure it's universal rather than just all.
Because I know you set up shortcuts, like you love a shortcut.
I do. I'm crazy about my shortcuts. But yeah, I want everyone to be able to experience the joy of the replace tool. So yeah, F11 is the built-in Premiere shortcut. So I should just verify that, because if I go in here, I do have my own little. So it should be under here, and I think, is it the replace with clip? You know what? I apologize. You're absolutely right. It doesn't have a built-in shortcut. So if you wanted to do that without setting it to F11, that might have got that from my old Final Cut days. So if you go to up here and we go to sequence, if we go, so with the timeline highlighted, we go to clip, replace with clip, from source monitor, match frame. That is the one that we want.
That's the magic one.
And so that's the magic one. So that's the
Oh, that's
the replace clip
cool.
one.
I really like that a lot.
Yes.
Because I've been very fiddly with just moving chunks of clips around and putting music in and then thinking, well, that doesn't really work. It's all a bit janky, and then having to move everything around so much. But with the slip method, even just that in and of itself makes it so much easier, because you can set everything up and then move things around.
Yes.
And as we were talking about before, it like really can change how I might think about shooting clips as well, and just shoot longer clips so they have a little bit of buffering on each side. I think the tip for me is probably to continue to shoot after I get the shot. Like, if it's a child doing something cool, I need to make sure I shoot enough afterwards in case I want to bring it in earlier.
Definitely, yeah. The more the merrier, and also by leaving it shooting, sometimes you end up getting just those bits of gold that you weren't counting on, and that applies in all circumstances. Like honestly, when if I'm shooting an interview, and sometimes we're talking to people, and that maybe they're a bit nervous when the camera's on, and they're super relaxed when the camera's off. Yeah. So we just leave it running and just keep chatting away, and that's where you get some gold. Like we sort of say, okay, that's great, we got it, and they go, what do you mean you got it? That's I didn't realize the camera was running. Not in a sort of deceitful way, but just in a way that makes sure that people are relaxed and conversational rather than feeling like they have to perform for the camera. Totally.
Yeah, and I think that works for everything else. Quick side note with podcasting as well, we always talked about doing like an after show where we want to just leave the microphone on after we do a podcast, because then they kind of, oh, cool, great, yeah, all that stuff that I was saying before, yeah, I mean, we do that most of the time except for these examples, and we're like, no, why didn't you say that on the thing? So yeah, I like
Yeah,
that. I
yeah.
like the idea of continuing to shoot. We do only have about 5 minutes left. So
Okay.
do we have time to jump into something else?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's
So
not
one
a
of
lot of
the
time.
that's not a lot of time, but I wanted to, just because I would be remiss to not mention the slide tool, because we talked about the slip tool. This is a little bit of shameless self-promotion, but it's a real-world example of what I was, because I just did a little tutorial for my YouTube channel the other day.
Nice.
So this is me at the end of my YouTube demo, and what I noticed was, I'm just going to mute this because I don't think you need to hear it. What I noticed was, as it's fading out, I sort of just blink just before it gets to the. You can sort of see it goes blink,
Blink.
and I
Oh,
just want to
nice.
get rid of that. But I want this sort of end frame to be up for. I've got it at exactly 10 seconds at the moment. So if I use my X key to highlight this region, I can see it's precisely 10 seconds, and I want it to remain 10 seconds just for consistency. And so this is where I'm going to use the slide tool. So the slide tool lets you move a clip just in the timeline left and right, so it stays the same duration. The clips around it change duration to accommodate that. So in this instance, if I click and drag that clip on the timeline, you can see I can basically find that bit where I blink, and I've just moved it. So in the timeline, just if you can see below the clip that I'm dragging, it says -103. So that's moving back 1 second and 3 frames. And then when I let go, it's automatically made this clip shorter.
Oh, cool.
And this clip has stayed the same duration. So now when I play it back, no more blink. So that's a really handy one to know about as well. I don't use it as often, but when you do need it, it's super handy. So here's another timeline. Just going to get rid of a couple of gaps in here because it was meant to demonstrate the gaps. And so if I decide that I like this clip and I want it to be the same duration, but I just need to move it to, it could be to marry up with some dialogue or some narrative or some music. I can just click and drag that with my slide tool, and you can see that it's automatically moving it's changing the out point of this and the in point of this clip, while my clip in the middle that I'm dragging stays the same duration. So you can just slide it around wherever you want. And you can still use the slip tool on that as well. So slip tool, again, as a reminder, I can see just by keeping the duration of that clip the same, I can change the in point and the out point of it until I get it to exactly the part that I want to use.
Oh, that's super useful.
Yeah, it's really, really good. And perhaps to just touch on before we go, if there's time.
There's probably not time, so why don't you tell us, and then because we'll be catching it next week, just because Behance kind of cuts us off like the news here in Australia, where they're just like, oh no, and then the news kicks in.
Okay, I'm just so excited to show all of these things. Okay, well, we've managed to get through some of these advanced editing tricks. And next week we've looked at some of the transition stuff as well. We jumped ahead there. We can look at color grading. That's a whole massive subject unto itself. Adding music and using markers for editing, which we just touched on before, but also ducking the audio so that you can hear a voice. And it'll be great to talk about transcoding for quicker editing, reconnecting missing media, and collecting files for when you're either sharing or archiving a project. It can be extremely helpful. And one thing that we haven't talked about at all, but is super important, is rendering, and how do you get your files out of Premiere and then onto, for example, YouTube or Vimeo or wherever you want to, Behance or wherever you want to put them. So it's another massive subject.
Awesome. Heaps to cover. So we will be back this time next week for a 2-hour episode. This is a bit of a shorter one today. And also Adobe Live is back tomorrow. So 9 o'clock tomorrow, we are we are here. So I hope you can join us for the rest of the week. We're here every morning, and we'll be here next week with Ian Haigh. Thank you so much for your time today, and thanks everyone in chat.
See you later, everyone. Thanks.
See you guys. Bye.